we sometimes also feel very uncomfortable with some new words as Russian speakers. But as professionals, as translators, we feel much more acutely lack of some borrowings. We want more, not less. We felt it when we started to compile an anthology with our students. It's an anthology of Victorian crime writing. It's called Not Just Holmes, and there are stories of contemporaries of Conan Doyle, but not Conan Doyle himself. And there were, actually detective fiction is about detail of life. And you have to deal with it as translator. You have to translate the detail. And sometimes we would see the phrases like this. When a broom was setting down, behind it was a Victoria, and behind that a hansom. None of the words, of course, exists in Russian. Now, there is a Soviet school of translation, much praised, and justly so, where you would replace all these things with probably one word, equipage, one generic word which carries equipage. But when you have it all in one sentence, you cannot very well say that there was equipage, and then another equipage, and then one more equipage. It will feel somewhat stupid. And so we had to borrow all three words from English. But we also had to explain to our reader what they mean and why we needed all three. And our book... Экипаж. Yes, sorry. Actually, we didn't have some pictures. We here in this book, we have pictures. We'll show it probably later. Sorry about that. There are pictures of all mentioned carriages of broom and Victoria and cab, hansom and cab, etc., with explanations.
So first, we didn't try to replace all these specific words with just generic words. And second, we tried to show the actual things that were mentioned.
And pictures of the things, so that our borrowings would be more substantial. We were not the first people to try this, because in the 30s there was a publishing house, Academia, in St. Petersburg, and I believe they had also a branch in Moscow. Which actually did the same thing. They borrowed a lot of words, they didn't simplify things, they didn't use generic words in translations, but they did a lot of commentary and pictures and explanations, etc. And they were considered suspicious because obviously their target reader was not every reader, which was something not very well taken at the time. For example, they would translate waterman as waterman in Russian. And when other translators said that why would you need this ugly word, because you can say konyukh, there is a word in Russian for someone who tends for horses, and they would say, no, but it's special man who gives water to the horses and nothing else, so it's very important. And they would explain this and borrow the word. Actually, this group of translators were called bukvalisti, literalists, and there was a great fight all over in 30s, 40s and 50s. There was great fight against them, against literalists, and they were destroyed, some of them physically, some of them were arrested and killed, and some of them were destroyed, because it was the time when all argument very easily
very badly.
Could go from classroom at the university to prison. And after that, another translation method won. And when we speak about wonderful Soviet translation, we mean actually the translators who won the battle and who thought that pure Russian language is the most important value, and that's something that translators should defend above all. And for example, in a very famous translation by Rita Wright-Kovaleva, who probably the most famous translator in Russian, hamburger is translated as a sandwich with a meatball, бутерброд с котлетой. That's how бутерброд с котлетой would look like. And it's not the problem. Actually, it's pretty much the same. But it has completely different set of associations to go with it. Because hamburger, obviously, it's some cheap street food.
Mass-produced.
Mass-produced. And бутерброд с котлетой is something that your mother is going to give you. Obviously, she did this котлеты meatballs herself, and she's giving you this package because you have a long day ahead of you. So the whole set of associations is completely wrong. And in this respect, probably, this is biляш. It's cheap street food.
Soviet street food.
Soviet meat pie would be better in this respect. But also, I must say that Rita Wright-Kovaleva didn't have much choice. Because even she herself knew what hamburger was. Her reader certainly didn't. And we had a wonderful story about other very good, wonderful Russian translator, Liliana Lungina, who was translating something, and she also came across the word hamburger, and she didn't know. It's okay. She didn't know what it was. So she asked her husband. She couldn't find the word anywhere, and she asked her husband, and he said, I think it's a coat. And the character in the book was carrying hamburger. And she said, okay, do you think I can write that he folded it on his arm? And the husband said, yeah, of course, why not? If it's a coat, he could probably fold it on his arm. And then, after a couple of pages, she said in a whisper, he has eaten it. And so it was a completely strange thing. And the translator didn't have much choice, and translator had to replace it with something that the reader would understand, or otherwise go and give a lot of commentary, explanation, pictures, explain associations that go with it, which was considered not very good method because every book was for mass reader, was for everybody, was for worker at the factory. And if it's too complicated, it shouldn't be done at all.
So these days we're better off because there is a word Gamburger in Russian, and its connotations are pretty much the same.
Yes, because actually, now we can have next slide. What is happening? Two things changed very seriously in our life. First, we know what hamburger is. And we have this difference between lobster and omar, because now we know the taste of the food, so we have another word to go with it. And second very important change is that, as everywhere else in the world, reader is more and more interested in non-fiction. And what you can do in fiction as a translator, you can't do in non-fiction. Here is a very interesting book, which is called Eating with Nero Wolfe. Probably you know that it's a detective by American writer Rex Stout, who was very interested in cooking and in food. And this sleuth had a cook at his house, and they are discussing food all the time in all the detective stories. And in Soviet times, they translated Nero Wolfe. But only recently they decided to translate, actually to write a book based on a cookery book, non-fiction book, written by Rex Stout. And they wanted to quote from detective stories and show the recipes that come with it. But then the authors of the book discovered that they cannot use translations because it's all wrong about food. Everything in Soviet translations is wrong because people have never seen this food, they didn't know anything about it, and translators thought it was not important because it doesn't matter. It's the same criminal, it's the same plot, and why do we care what they discuss about food and eating? And so with this non-fiction book, this problem of translation came to the surface. And this book, instead of being just a cookery book, appeared to be a book about translation, about how everything was mistranslated. So, actually, next And here we have this problem that we only can do what Soviet School of Translation did if we want to preserve our language pure and intact. If we treat the rest of the world as fairy tale Neverland, as soon as we can touch it, have a taste of its food, can go abroad, can meet real people, we can't do it anymore. Because we know exactly that hamburger is not buterbrod с котлетой. And then we start needing more and more words. Here is window seat. The word is non-existent in Russian. And
not
it's
just the word, the
concept,
the feature,
both the window seat itself and the word. And actually some passages from...
The interesting thing is that actually you can build a house and create a window seat there, but you wouldn't know how to call it.
And actually some passages from British classics reads very strangely because we don't have this word. For example, Jane Eyre behaves in a very strange way when she's a governess in the house sitting on window sills all the time. And another thing is drawing room, and its difference from from sitting room, because we don't have the two words. And if you translate fiction, you can very well do with one. But if you start translating non-fiction about how English house is organized, which is very popular now, these types of books which explain everything, and there is separate chapter on sitting room and separate chapter on drawing room, you're in trouble. Because you have just one word and no concept of drawing room. It was a very funny mistake. There was a actually very strange book by someone called Tanya Dietrich about English house and Victorian life. Victorian England. And she translated drawing room as рисовальная комната because she thought it was because to draw. He thought that it was a room which people used to draw something in it. But of course, if you don't want to use this type of naive etymology, you have a lot more difficulty with it.
Well, the thing is actually, if you take any book by a specialist on his or her specialist subject, you will see that people face this problem all the time. Take a book on Greek philosophy, you will find Greek words all over it. Take a book on Renaissance painting, you will see many Italian words. Take a book on, German existentialism, you will find some German words and so on. So this problem exists in specialist literature, and specialists understand it very well. And when you translate fiction, you probably can't resort to that very often. But on the other hand, you can't just imagine that window seats and hamburgers don't exist.
So we think that what happens with a lot of borrowings in Russian language has a lot to do with change in our life. And we think it was a good change. And that's why we are more open to borrowings than probably most of the people in our profession. And to finish this talk, we would like to quote our favorite Russian scholar, Mikhail Gasparov.
This is a quote from a very funny questionnaire of a kind of a men's magazine, Medved, which Mikhail Leonovich quoted in his collection of memorabilia from the year 2000. Unfortunately, he died in 2005. So the question was, why do you think in our recent totalitarian past literature was on the rise, but when all bans were lifted it ceased to exist? And the answer to that was it really on such a rise? Has it really quite ceased to exist?
And the same applies to translation. We also, the rise of Soviet translation and the supposed catastrophe that we experience now are also something to be examined deeper.
As recently as yesterday, we were giving a phone interview to a Moscow magazine, Afisha, which for some reason decided to write a feature about translation. And whenever you hear, so to say, street talk about translation, as much as there is such thing as street talk about translation, the general idea is, again, we're doomed. The translations were very good some time ago, and now it's all rubbish. There are lots and lots of awful translations when you switch on TV and you listen to things, to how movies are being translated, for example. You can die laughing or crying.